Hey guys, Ryan here, and I'm going to cover the squat pattern today. We're going to show you some common errors that we typically see, how to address that, how to fix your stance to make sure that you are squatting the most appropriate way for you. Now, once you know the best way to squat, it's just a matter of different tools that you're going to use to implement that squat. It really doesn't matter that much as long as your technique stays fairly the same with all of them, okay? So, some common errors that we typically see with the squat pattern. The first most common error that we see when somebody's squatting is that they're going through a knee collapse. So if I'm squatting down here and my knees are collapsing in, that's not a good thing to be going through because it's putting a lot of strain and stress on those knees. You might start feeling some pain, and also you're just not in an optimal position to lift heavier weights, okay? The second common error that we see is people with too narrow of a stance. And if your stance is far too narrow, you're not going to be able to get the depth, specifically because a lot of folks might have some ankle mobility issues or some hip mobility issues. If your stance is narrow, I can't really get down and deep as far as I can or as far as I should be able to go when completing that squat. The next common error that we see is just squat depth, and where folks just stop short of full range of motion. We consider, or I consider, full range of motion squat is when your hip bone gets at or just below that kneecap level. Okay, so one more time. Can I get down to this kneecap level or just below? Okay. Next common error that we see is a forward lean. All right. So if I'm doing a squat here and I'm doing this, okay. If my hips are going way back, that's more of a hip hinge pattern. Forward lean, chest down. That could be an indicator of ankle mobility problems or hip mobility issues, and we certainly want to make sure that we're addressing those prior to getting into a lot of loaded exercises. The last common error that we see is on the ascent coming up, we see kind of a waving motion. So people might be able to get down into that full squat, but if they don't have enough trunk stability or strength to get back up, we see this kind of waving pattern, and it looks like this. I'm going to get all the way down, and then when I go to stand, my hips rise first, and then I come back up, okay? So we're going to address some of those today. We're going to show you how to make sure that you're squatting optimally for your body type and make sure that you can load the pattern appropriately for whatever level you are. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is your stance and your setup. Now, a lot of people have been told that their toes need to be completely straight ahead or that they need to be exactly shoulder width apart. And the first one is we're going to talk about is that width. Now, width, I like to say just outside shoulder width apart, maybe slightly inside, somewhere around there. But what I'm looking for is a good position to allow me to sit my hips between my knees, essentially. And if we're too far in, we're not going to be able to get enough leverage to come back up with strength. If we're too far out, then it's also going to compromise our strength and also just not really feel as good as it should. Okay? If you can get your stance right, this can clear up a lot of issues for most people. So stance, I'm going to think just outside shoulder width apart. I can adjust that slightly if I need to, depending on the person. The second thing that we're going to cover is foot position. We've often been taught that those toes need to be directly straight ahead, but the problem with that is that most people, when you go to flex your glutes or get full contraction there, you're going to get a little bit of external rotation, and that's where that torque comes to get back up. So what I tell people is they can let that foot position slightly externally rotate a little bit. Now, I don't want to be duck foot, anything like that, or pigeon, anything like that, but I am going to allow a little bit of that open stance because that will allow my knees to track, okay? Second thing is the setup of your spine, right? I don't want to be rounded. I don't want to be overarched. I'm looking for a nice, tall, neutral position. Before I drop down into my ascent, I'm thinking plank, you know, we learned a good solid plank position, I'm going to take that bracing idea into my squat position as well. Okay? And then next we're going to cover into some cues to make sure that you're squatting the most appropriate way. Okay, now we're talking about cues. So we have our stance. That foot position is slightly externally rotated, feet just outside shoulder width apart. Your first cue now, after we're in that good neutral position, is to think brace and pull down. Okay? So what that looks like is I'm going to brace, and I'm going to use my hip flexors to think about pulling my knees into my chest all the way down. Okay? So think brace, pull. Brace, pull. From the front, brace, pull. All right? Second cue is that I just want you to imagine that you're kind of prying your hips open as you're doing this, and that your hips are sitting between your knees. Simple as that. Brace. I'm going to pull and pry. Notice at the bottom of this position, I'm just sitting between my knees. All right, shake that out a little bit, and we're going to move on to the third cue. These knees, we want to make sure are tracking over your toes, and that's going to eliminate this squat position, okay? So if I'm tracking over my toes, that knee point when I come straight down should go right over the toe or the foot and not inside. So I'm tracking over. If I give myself a quick check, yep, I'm pretty much over my toes there. Last thing is we're going to address the ascent, okay? To limit the amount of that hip leading the movement up, I want you to think about leading with the crown of your head, okay? So brace and pull. Now when I stand, I don't want to stand using my hips. I want to think about leading with the crown of my head. It's like there's a string or rope attached to the top of my head, and it's pulling me straight up into the ceiling. Just like so. So, pause this video if you need to. Give those few cues and that adjustment of stance a try, and then we'll come back to it and I'll show you a few progressions to the squat. All right, so here's a couple progressions that I take everybody through depending on what level and skill set they're at with the squat position. Now, if somebody's experiencing a lot of knee pain or discomfort, even after we've made those adjustments with your setup and the cues and everything, then I don't want anybody to actively move into pain. So we're gonna start you off with something that's very low barrier of entry and just to pattern the movement itself. So this is the rocking pattern. And all you're gonna do is your stance is gonna be the same as your squat. You're gonna set up your feet just outside shoulder width apart. You can have a slight external rotation of the foot. Your knees are tracking over your toes. And if you notice, if you just kind of flip me up on my standing position, I'd be in the bottom of my squat right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over my hands. I'm in a good neutral position. I'm gonna brace and pull. Come back up. Brace, pull. Come back up. Brace, pull. Now what I could do if I wanted to improve more hip mobility is I could just point my toes. That would allow me to get a little bit deeper. All the cues still apply. Brace, pull. And you notice I get a little bit deeper with that squat position. All right, so our next progression of the squat is we've gone from rocking. Now we can actually go to a regular stance standing up, but we're gonna hold on to something. So you can really hold on to anything. I like to tell people to hold on to like a doorknob or a bar or a railing, whatever it is that allows you to get into that full range of motion squat. So I'm just gonna use this kind of board right here, just put my hand for assistance. My stance and everything remains the same, and I'm gonna drop down into a squat. Come back up, you can see it from the back. Okay, and you can play around with this a little bit. For example, I could hold on to something when I'm coming down into that squat, but as I'm coming back up, maybe I let that go and use more of my own strength and endurance to do so to get back up. Moving on from that squat position, we had the air squat, which we taught, and you can just use your arms as a counterbalance for that. But next we move into is this squat variation I really love is called a counterbalance squat. And you can use anything to counter your balance of the squat. It just helps you stay a little bit more upright, helps you get into your hips a little bit better. And I have a couple tools. So if I was using, this is just a 10-pound bumper plate, I'm just gonna do is I'm gonna extend my arms, come back up. Extend my arms, come back up. If I was using a dumbbell, same thing. I'm gonna hold it here. I'm gonna extend, come back up. And I'm just looking to keep that nice tall posture as I come back up, okay? Again, another tool, kettlebell. You could use a lampshade. You could use another human, a baby if you want to. It doesn't really matter. What this is going to help is create a little bit more anterior trunk stability. And then I just bring it back in as I stand. All right, so the last exercise of progressions, last exercise in the progression that we're doing is the goblet squat. And you can use this again with the dumbbell or kettlebell. You can load it a little bit more with the dumbbell or the kettlebell. I wouldn't use a bumper plate because I don't know if you could go very heavy with it, but you can try it. So here is the goblet squat, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that weight. I can hold it like this, or I can hold it like this. It doesn't really matter. I just prefer to hold it like so. So with the goblet squat now, we're not extending that weight away from us. We're holding it in close, and I'm squeezing my shoulder blades down, my lats down. And as I squat here, I'm just creating tension like the plank, and everything's the same. My elbows are gonna finish just inside my knees. Come back up. One more time. Create tension, pull down, come back up. From the side, come back up. Now, you can choose to go as heavy as you want on this with a dumbbell or a kettlebell. So if you had 100 pounds, you could do a 100-pound weight if you wanted to. But those are my first few progressions for squatting. Really practice those, get good at those, master those, and then you can start adding into other progressions and other types of squats. Let me know if you have any questions.